You guys just keep asking for the more Reddit stories. So, I'm ready with the new tale. Let's read some cool, interesting cheating wife Reddit stories. And guys, I'm trying to hit 1,000 subs before the end of the year, and I think we can do it. So please subscribe and let's get straight into this one. I found out my wife was cheating with my best friend, and I did this to them. It all started with a look, just a glance here and there, and suddenly, my best friend, and the man I trusted more than anyone, was spending more time with my wife than I was. My name's John, and if anyone had told me a year ago that my wife, Sarah, and my best friend, Derek, would turn my life upside down, I'd have laughed. I'm not the kind of guy who thinks his life will spiral into chaos. I'm confident, serious, a no-nonsense kind of guy who's not easily rattled. But I guess it's the ones you don't expect who fall the hardest. Sarah and I had been married for 6 years, and Derek had been a friend long before I'd even met her. We were close, like brothers. He was the kind of friend who would help me move on a weekend, or show up at my doorstep in the middle of the night when things got rough. And he was married himself, though he and his wife had gone their separate ways about a year ago. That's when things started to change. After Derek's divorce, I felt sorry for him. He was devastated, and naturally, Sarah and I wanted to be there for him. Sarah, though, seemed especially supportive. It was innocent at first. She'd check on him, bring him over for dinner more often, invite him to family events so he didn't feel lonely. I didn't mind. I was glad she cared enough to help him out. But looking back, maybe that's where I should have been more cautious. The first time I felt uneasy was when Sarah started staying out later than usual, claiming she was visiting her sister. Then there was a gym membership she didn't need to explain to me, claiming she wanted to get in better shape. It wasn't like her to hide things, and when I asked her about it, she laughed it off. "Don't you want a wife who takes care of herself?" she teased, flashing that coy smile I'd always loved. I let it go, thinking maybe I was being paranoid. But that was just the beginning. One night, I got home from a long day at work, expecting to unwind. But when I walked into the living room, I found Sarah on the couch with Derek. They were laughing, shoulders close, a glass of wine in each of their hands. Her face lit up in a way I hadn't seen in a while. She didn't even notice me walk in until Derek, catching sight of me, coughed awkwardly and pulled away from her slightly. "Hey, babe," Sarah greeted me, her voice overly casual as if she'd been caught doing something far worse than sharing a laugh. "You're home early." Derek cleared his throat, trying to ease the tension. I just came by to borrow a couple of tools from the garage. Hope that's okay, John." "Of course," I replied, masking my unease with a forced smile. But something felt off. My wife hadn't been this friendly with Derek before. The more I noticed these subtle shifts, the more they grew. Sarah would brush off my questions with excuses that seemed plausible, but somehow wrong. The way she acted around Derek was different now, more attentive, flirtatious. And Derek wasn't helping. I tried to convince myself it was just a phase, that I was being overly possessive, that it was all in my head. But the gnawing suspicion only grew stronger. Then one night, it became impossible to ignore. 2 weeks had passed since that evening, and things only got stranger. Sarah's phone, which she usually left lying around, now seemed glued to her hand. Every time it buzzed, she'd glance at it quickly, often smiling at the screen before turning it face down on the counter. Her social media was suddenly more active, with vague posts about new adventures and cherishing every moment. Friends and family commented, but her responses were carefully crafted and seemed evasive. That little knot of doubt in my gut was now a full-blown ache. Something was going on. Derek and I, once practically inseparable, now saw less and less of each other. When I'd ask him to grab a drink or hit the gym, he'd make excuses, saying he was busy with work or catching up on things. The few times we did hang out, he seemed distracted. There was an edge to his voice, something I'd never heard before, like guilt or anxiety simmering just below the surface. He'd look me in the eye, but only for a split second before glancing away, and I could feel our conversations getting shorter, filled with awkward silences. One Friday, I decided to surprise Sarah at work, hoping to shake off the creeping paranoia. I thought maybe we could go out for dinner, just the two of us, and talk. But when I arrived at her office, I found her desk empty. Her assistant, a chipper young guy named Mark, greeted me with a cheerful, "Hey, John. Sarah told us she'd be out this afternoon for a family thing. Everything okay?" I forced a smile, masking the confusion churning inside me. Family thing? I knew nothing about it, and her sister hadn't mentioned any plans. But I managed to say, "Right, of course. Thanks, Mark." I left her office, my mind racing. Had she lied to me? Where could she be? Instead of going home, I drove to Derek's place. His car was parked outside, and from the street, I could see lights on in the living room. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel, feeling my heart pound. This was ridiculous, I told myself. Derek wouldn't do that to me. Sarah wouldn't either. But just as I was about to drive away, I saw movement through the window. It was Sarah, unmistakably her, laughing and pouring wine into a glass as she leaned in close to Derek. The sight felt like a punch to the gut, the air leaving my lungs in one swift motion. They clinked their glasses, her hand grazing his as they smiled at each other with an intensity one couldn't mistake. She wore a look I hadn't seen in years, a mixture of excitement and something else. It was almost like she was meeting him for the first time, flirting in a way I thought she reserved for me. The urge to storm inside, to confront them, was overwhelming. My fingers tightened on the door handle, and for a split second, I nearly threw it open. But something held me back. I wanted to know how far they'd go. I wanted the truth. I stayed in the car, watching, each second feeling like a knife twisting deeper. Eventually, they moved to the couch, sitting so close their knees touched, laughing and whispering. I tried to focus, to make sense of what I was seeing, but my thoughts were a chaotic mess. The idea that Sarah, the woman I'd built my life with, could betray me with Derek, the man I trusted with my life, felt surreal, impossible. But there it was, playing out right in front of me. Finally, they stood up, and Derek walked her to the door. They exchanged a lingering hug, and I caught the look in Sarah's eyes as she whispered something in his ear. I couldn't hear the words, but the expression on her face was enough. This wasn't a one-time thing. This was real, something they shared, something they'd built behind my back. I drove home in a haze, my mind spinning with rage, hurt, and disbelief. By the time I walked through the door, I felt sick to my stomach. I didn't sleep that night. I barely even blinked. The image of them together played over and over in my head like a horror film I couldn't turn off. The next morning, I decided that if Sarah and Derek wanted to play games, I'd give them something to think about. The following week was a slow-burning nightmare. Every look, every casual gesture between Sarah and me felt fake, like we were actors in some twisted play. My mind was a storm of anger and suspicion, but I kept my face neutral, forcing a smile whenever she looked my way. I knew I needed to gather more than just my gut feelings and the brief glimpse I'd caught through Derek's window. So, I began watching closely, looking for any signs that might confirm my worst fears. One night, Sarah was in the shower, and her phone sat charging on the kitchen counter. My hands itched to check it, to scroll through every app, every text thread, every photo, but I didn't want to come off as paranoid. Instead, I waited. If there was something to find, I was sure it would come out soon enough. I just had to be patient. Then, 2 nights later, an opportunity presented itself. Sarah told me she had a late meeting and would be home after 9. She looked at me with a forced, almost guilty smile. I could tell she was testing me, seeing if I'd ask questions. Instead, I nodded and told her to take her time. I watched her car pull out of the driveway, my heart pounding as I went to the garage to get my own. My gut told me she wouldn't be at any meeting. So, she drove toward the edge of town, and my pulse raced as she turned into a small motel parking lot. She parked in the far corner, away from the main entrance, and I watched as Derek's car pulled up right beside her. They both got out and headed inside together, not even a glance back to check if anyone was watching. I parked down the street, too far away to confront them, but close enough to seethe in silence. They were in there for nearly an hour before they came out, both of them looking a little too relaxed, a little too pleased with themselves. I watched as Derek brushed a strand of hair from her face, the way she looked up at him, laughing. The familiarity, the ease, it gutted me. I wanted to explode, to barge in and let them know they'd been caught. But something inside me told me to hold back. I didn't just want an argument. I wanted justice. A plan began to form in my mind, dark and calculated. I wasn't just going to confront them. I was going to make them regret every minute they'd spent together behind my back. I kept my distance and drove home, pretending I hadn't seen a thing. I made a point of acting normal that night, even cooked dinner for us. When Sarah finally came in, she seemed surprised, a bit taken aback by my cheerful attitude. She mentioned her meeting briefly, casually brushing it off, like she hadn't just spent an hour in a motel with my best friend. After dinner, I brought up Derek, testing her reaction. I was thinking about inviting Derek over this weekend, I said. It feels like we haven't spent time with him in a while. Her fork froze mid-air, just for a second, but she recovered quickly. Oh, that's a great idea, she replied, forcing a smile. He could probably use some company. There it was, that flicker of hesitation, the smallest hint of guilt. She knew. She knew exactly what she was doing, and yet she sat there, laughing, smiling, pretending as if nothing was wrong. I'd been right to hold back earlier. If I wanted to take them down, I needed to be strategic. The next day, I started working on my plan. I'd capture everything. I set up hidden cameras in the house, placed one near the front door, and another in the living room. I wanted evidence, something undeniable. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about showing them that I knew, and that I'd been planning my response. Then, I waited. Sure enough, 2 days later, Sarah told me she'd be working late again. My pulse quickened, but I played it cool, nodding and even offering to make her a late dinner for when she got home. She gave me a quick peck on the cheek and rushed out the door, clearly eager for her meeting. As soon as she was gone, I pulled out my phone and connected to the cameras. I waited, heart pounding, watching the empty living room until, right on cue, Derek let himself in with the spare key we'd given him years ago. He paced the room nervously, checking his watch, looking around as if he knew he was doing something forbidden. Then Sarah walked in, her face lighting up as she saw him. She ran into his arms, and they kissed passionately, as if they hadn't a care in the world. It was all there. Every touch, every whisper, every stolen moment. I sat in the dark, seething as I recorded everything. By the time they left, my mind was made up. If they wanted to play games, I'd play too, but they'd be the ones who would lose. Over the next week, I was methodical, ruthless in my silence. I could tell Sarah felt that things were shifting. She'd catch me looking at her with a gaze colder than usual, though I'd force a smile and brush it off. But the truth? I wanted her to feel that tension, to wonder if something was wrong. I wanted her to question what she thought she knew. One night, I decided to confront Derek indirectly. I invited him out to our favorite bar, just the two of us. If he noticed anything strange in my demeanor, he didn't let on. He greeted me with the same easy grin, the same casual air as if nothing had changed. We ordered a couple of beers, talked about work, the usual surface stuff, but I could feel the anger bubbling under my skin as I watched him. He laughed, he joked, he was relaxed as ever, without the slightest flicker of guilt or hesitation. Eventually, I leaned in, fixing him with a steady stare. So, how are you handling things? I asked, keeping my tone casual. I mean, you've had a rough year with the divorce and all. Derek shrugged, looking genuinely pleased with himself. Man, I feel great. Actually, I've been seeing someone new. She's incredible. Totally different than anyone I've been with before. Oh, I said, raising my eyebrows. Anyone I know? Derek's eyes darted to his glass for the briefest moment before he smiled. Nah, just someone I met recently. We clicked. His words were light, but I could tell he was choosing them carefully, as if he sensed the danger in revealing too much. I watched him, my own smile not quite reaching my eyes. Well, I'm glad. I was beginning to think you'd never move on. I clinked my glass against his, taking a long, slow sip while he looked away, a faint hint of color creeping into his cheeks. It was almost amusing, watching him try to keep his secrets so close while sitting across from me. I realized then that this was going to be easier than I thought. They both thought they were in control, sneaking around without a clue that I knew everything. The satisfaction of watching them walk into their own trap was almost intoxicating. Over the next few days, I continued building my arsenal. I recorded every rendezvous, every late-night visit, every moment Sarah thought she was away from my prying eyes. And I could tell she was getting bolder, her lies more elaborate. She'd mention going to her sister's or running errands late at night, barely making eye contact. I didn't bother challenging her lies. I wanted her to dig that hole as deep as possible. Then came the day of our anniversary. I'd planned a special dinner, one that would end up being unforgettable in every sense. Sarah came home from work looking a little flustered, clearly caught off guard by the candles I'd set out, the flowers on the table, and the elaborate meal I'd spent hours preparing. She forced a smile as she took her seat, shifting uncomfortably, like a kid caught sneaking out past curfew. "Happy anniversary, babe," I said, raising a glass of wine. "Here's to us." She smiled weakly, barely meeting my gaze. "You really went all out," she said, sounding both surprised and guilty. "Well, it's not every day you celebrate 6 years of marriage, right?" I replied, my tone sweet but edged with an iciness I could tell she noticed. We sat in near silence, the air thick with tension. I wanted her to feel the weight of what she'd done without me saying a word. As we finished our meal, I reached under my chair, pulling out a small, elegant box, and placed it on the table between us. Sarah's eyes widened as she looked at it, clearly thrown off. "Oh, John, you didn't have to," she began, but I cut her off with a gentle smile. "Open it," I said. She lifted the lid, revealing a small flash drive nestled in black velvet. Her smile faltered, confusion knitting her brows. What's this?" I leaned back in my chair, savoring the moment. "That, my dear, is a collection of memories. Footage, to be exact." Her eyes darted to mine, panic flashing across her face. "John, what are you talking about?" I took a slow sip of wine, watching her squirm. "I know, Sarah. About you and Derek. Every lie, every secret meeting. It's all right there." I tapped the flash drive, relishing the horror spreading across her face. She sat frozen, her hands trembling as she gripped the table. "John, I can explain." I raised a hand, cutting her off. "Save it. I've heard enough lies from you to last a lifetime." The color drained from her face as the reality hit her. She stammered, struggling to find words, but all I saw was the betrayal, the selfishness that had tainted everything we'd built together. "You didn't think I'd find out, did you?" I continued, keeping my voice steady. "You thought I'd just keep sitting here, oblivious, while you and Derek made a fool of me." Tears welled up in her eyes as she finally broke down. "John, please, I don't know why it happened. I'm sorry. I messed up. I was lonely, and I didn't know how to talk to you." I shook my head, unmoved by her excuses. "Lonely?" I repeated, letting the word hang in the air. "You were lonely, so you decided to tear everything apart with my best friend? The man I trusted with my life?" She tried reaching out for my hand, but I pulled it away, letting the silence stretch between us. "You know what, Sarah?" I said finally, my voice cold. "You can have him. Whatever you think he offers you, go ahead and take it. But I guarantee you won't like the ending." She looked up at me, terror and regret in her eyes, but I didn't waver. I'd made up my mind. This wasn't just about them hurting me. This was about making sure they felt the full weight of what they'd done. And from that moment on, my plans were set in motion. After our anniversary dinner, the tension between Sarah and me was unbearable. She spent the next few days treading lightly, doing everything she could to act normal, as if a bit of kindness or a few apologies would somehow erase the damage. But I didn't let her off the hook. Each time she tried to talk, I would shut her down with a look. I could see the fear growing in her eyes every time she realized I wasn't forgiving or forgetting. And as for Derek, he didn't know yet that I was coming for him too. I began setting the stage for the ultimate betrayal. In the days following the anniversary dinner, I dropped hints to Sarah, letting her think I was softening, that maybe, just maybe, I was willing to work things out. I told her we could go on a vacation together to reconnect, using words she'd probably read in some affair recovery article. The idea thrilled her. and I could see the relief wash over her face when she thought I was warming up to her again. "Maybe this could be a fresh start," she said one night, her voice hopeful. "Maybe," I replied, my tone distant but just warm enough to give her hope. "It'll take time, but maybe we can rebuild." Little did she know, the trip I was planning had nothing to do with reconciliation. One evening, I set my plan into full motion. Sarah had left her laptop open on the coffee table, and I noticed she was logged into her email account. An idea sparked. I composed a quick email to Derek from her account, suggesting that they meet up soon, but this time at a more secluded spot, a cabin I'd recently rented under her name. I crafted the message carefully, making it sound like she was desperate for some final closure with him before she could truly move on with me. Derek replied almost immediately. He was eager, of course, and he agreed to meet her there that Friday night. Perfect. With the location set, I made arrangements with a mutual friend who worked as a private investigator, asking him to capture everything on camera. When he asked why, I simply said, "I need proof." The kind no one can argue with. He agreed without prying too much, likely guessing the reason for my grim expression. By Thursday night, I told Sarah about my business trip scheduled for the weekend. She seemed disappointed but hid it well, a glimmer of excitement sparking in her eyes, probably thinking of the night she'd spend with Derek. As she packed her overnight bag on Friday, I watched her, feeling a strange mix of anger and dark satisfaction. She really thought she was getting away with it. "Drive safe, babe," I said, feigning casual warmth as she leaned in to kiss me goodbye. The lies tasted bitter on my tongue, but I played my part. I even hugged her, watching as she drove off, her face lit with the thrill of deception. I knew where she was headed, and I knew Derek would be there waiting. I waited until I was sure she was gone, then called my friend to confirm he was in position near the cabin, ready to record every detail. He texted back a quick "all set," and I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Everything was going exactly as planned. Around midnight, I received the first batch of photos from him, grainy but unmistakable images of Sarah and Derek locked in an embrace outside the cabin door. They looked over their shoulders, checking to see if anyone was around, completely unaware they were being watched. Each new photo he sent made my blood boil, but I forced myself to stay calm. This was what I wanted. Evidence, undeniable proof of their betrayal. Hours passed, and finally, at dawn, my investigator friend called. "Got everything, John," he said, his voice calm and professional. "You'll get the full file later today, but let's just say you'll have all you need." "Thanks, man," I replied, trying to keep the relief out of my voice. "I owe you one." Once I had the images and video clips secured, I wasted no time. By noon, I'd arranged a meeting with Derek at a local bar we both frequented. He showed up on time, his face still flushed with whatever thrill he'd felt the night before, completely oblivious to what was coming. "Hey, John," he greeted me, clapping me on the back. "How's it going, man?" "Good, Derek," I replied coolly, waving the bartender over to order drinks. "Just thought we'd catch up, have a little chat." He grinned, settling into his seat, completely unaware of the ticking bomb I was about to drop on him. After a bit of small talk, I casually slipped a USB drive out of my pocket and slid it across the table toward him. He looked down at it, then up at me, confusion creasing his brow. "What's this?" he asked, chuckling nervously. "Go ahead," I said, leaning back. "Consider it a gift. You might want to take a look." Derek hesitated, glancing at me with a hint of suspicion before picking up the USB drive and pocketing it. "What's on here?" "Just a little something I think you and Sarah might find interesting," I replied, my voice dripping with barely restrained contempt. "You can thank me later." Realization dawned in his eyes, the smirk fading from his face as he tried to read my expression. "John, I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't you?" I said, my tone hardening. "That cabin last night, ring any bells?" His face paled instantly, and he stammered, struggling for words. "John, look, I can explain, but I'd had enough." I leaned forward, pinning him with a glare that must have made him realize the gravity of his mistake. "You can save it. Whatever excuses you've got, I don't want to hear them. I've seen everything, Derek. Every lie, every betrayal." He opened his mouth, probably to protest, but I cut him off. You and Sarah thought you could play me, make a fool out of me. But you know what? You just exposed yourselves as the pathetic, backstabbing cowards you are. And trust me, everyone is about to know the truth. Derek's face was a mix of shock and fear, his confidence crumbling as he realized just how deep he dug his own grave. I stood up, leaving him speechless as I threw a few bills on the table and walked out, feeling a strange, dark satisfaction settling over me. The next day, I was ready for phase 2. With Derek thoroughly shaken, it was time to unravel Sarah's world in a way she would never forget. ID decided to expose the affair in the most public and humiliating way possible, where it would be impossible for her to hide or explain it away. The only people who didn't yet know about her betrayal were our closest friends and family. They were all in for a rude awakening. I began by sending invitations to a belated anniversary party, a gathering I claimed would help us reconnect with everyone who had been part of our journey as a couple. Our marriage had been celebrated over the years by people who genuinely cared about us, people who would be just as blindsided by the truth as I had been. The gathering was set for the following weekend at a rented event space, a place big enough for everyone to attend, yet intimate enough for the reveal I had in mind. When Sarah came home that evening, I brought it up casually. "Honey, I was thinking we should have a get-together for our anniversary," I said, gauging her reaction. She looked up, surprised but clearly pleased. "Oh, really? That sounds wonderful. I'd love that." I forced a smile, hiding the contempt simmering beneath. "Great. I'll handle everything. You just show up and enjoy yourself." She looked at me warmly, with a flicker of something close to genuine affection. If she'd known what I was planning, I doubt she would have been so eager. She had no idea that the party would mark the end, not the beginning, of anything resembling reconciliation. In the days leading up to the event, I carefully arranged everything. I made sure our friends, family, and a few of her colleagues would attend. Meanwhile, I finalized all the files I needed: photos, videos, and copies of their text exchanges. It was all set, saved to a presentation that I'd prepared to display on a large screen. No more secrets, no more lies. Just the cold, hard truth laid bare. The night before the party, I noticed Sarah packing an overnight bag again. She was talking on the phone in the other room, her voice hushed and full of excitement. "I can't wait to see you," she whispered, clearly talking to Derek. I smiled grimly. Her betrayal ran so deep, and her blindness to the reality she was about to face was almost laughable. I couldn't wait to watch her realize how thoroughly she'd underestimated me. On the day of the party, Sarah spent extra time getting ready, picking out a dress and jewelry, even asking my opinion as she spun around in the mirror. I nodded, biting back the bile rising in my throat, and simply said, "You look perfect." The party was in full swing by the time we arrived. I had arranged everything with impeccable detail: the music, the lighting, the food. Friends and family mingled, sharing drinks and stories. Everyone seemed genuinely happy to be there, and Sarah soaked it all in, greeting people warmly, flashing smiles, and chatting like she had no worries in the world. Once everyone had settled, I stepped onto the small stage, holding up a glass. "If I could have everyone's attention, please," I began, smiling as everyone quieted down. I felt a surge of adrenaline. This was it. "Thank you all for coming. This celebration means a lot to Sarah and me. We're honored to have you all here to celebrate our anniversary." The crowd clapped, and I caught Sarah's smile as she looked up at me, oblivious to what was coming next. I wanted to share a little presentation, some memories, and a reminder of the love we've shared over the years. I nodded to the tech assistant, who dimmed the lights and hit play on the slideshow I'd prepared. The screen lit up with our wedding photos, memories of vacations, and photos of our family over the years. The crowd smiled, some people cheering, others raising their glasses in a toast. But as the photos continued, I saw Sarah relax, a soft smile on her face as she relived the memories. Then, the photos shifted. One by one, images of Sarah and Derek began to flash across the screen. It started with subtle moments, like the two of them laughing at a party, standing too close to each other. Then came the more damning ones, photos of them holding hands, stolen kisses, and finally, pictures taken at the cabin. The entire room fell silent. The expressions on people's faces transformed from confusion to horror as the reality of what they were seeing sank in. Sarah's face went white. She gasped, reaching out as if she could somehow stop the images flashing on the screen. "John," she whispered, her voice a mix of panic and disbelief. "What are you doing?" I ignored her, continuing with the presentation. The final image lingered on the screen, a video of her and Derek laughing together at the cabin door. I could see her collapse into a chair, her hands covering her face as murmurs of shock and anger filled the room. Derek, who had shown up late, stood near the door, frozen, his face pale as he realized everyone in the room was staring at him. I stepped back to the microphone, my voice steady. "Thank you all for being here tonight. I thought it was only fair that you all see what I've been seeing and what Sarah and Derek have been hiding." I turned to face her, my expression hard. "Sarah, you didn't just betray me. You betrayed everyone in this room, every friend and family member who trusted you." Sarah looked up at me, tears streaming down her face, her mouth opening and closing as she tried to find the words. "John, please, I can explain," she stammered, reaching out, but I stepped back, not letting her touch me. I turned to the crowd, addressing them directly. "I want to apologize to all of you for having to witness this, but I think it's only right that you know the truth about who Sarah and Derek really are." I let the words hang, knowing they would never forget this moment. One by one, our friends and family filed out, some shaking their heads, others casting angry, disappointed glances at Sarah and Derek. Her parents looked devastated, her friends in shock. By the time the last guest left, Sarah was sitting alone, a broken shell of the confident, carefree woman she'd been earlier that evening. "John," she sobbed, reaching out again. We can fix this, can't we?" I looked down at her, feeling no pity. "This was never about fixing anything, Sarah. This was about showing you exactly what you destroyed." Derek tried to intervene, his voice trembling. "John, man, I snapped, silencing him with a glare. "You made your choices, Derek. Both of you did. And now, you'll have to live with them." I turned and walked out, leaving them behind to face the aftermath of their betrayal. The devastation I'd left behind was nothing compared to the damage they'd caused. And for the first time since I discovered their affair, I felt a sense of peace, knowing I had exposed them completely. I left the event hall with a sense of finality, the cold night air feeling like a clean slate. Sarah and Derek were still inside, no doubt reeling from the humiliation I'd left them to sort through. I knew that once they realized what had happened, there would be a flood of attempts to explain, apologize, or bargain their way back into my life. But I was done. I wanted nothing to do with either of them. Sure enough, that night my phone was flooded with messages and calls. Sarah's texts ranged from tearful apologies to pleas to sit down and talk. I ignored each one, watching as she tried to justify the unjustifiable. Derek, true to his cowardly nature, only managed a single text, "We need to talk, man." The audacity was almost laughable, but I wasn't finished yet. I wanted to ensure that Sarah and Derek felt the sting of what they'd done, every day. Their betrayal deserved consequences beyond one night of public shame. So, over the next few days, I made calls. I reached out to colleagues, mutual friends, and even Sarah's family, filling them in on the details of what had really gone on. I provided them with irrefutable evidence, the photos, the texts. The disgusted responses I got from friends and family told me everything I needed to know. They'd feel the weight of this betrayal from all directions. I knew Sarah would be especially vulnerable to public judgment. She had always valued her reputation and image more than anything else. Her parents were mortified, hardly able to look her in the eye after the party. Her friends abandoned her, too disgusted to be associated with her deceit. She had been the picture-perfect wife to everyone around her, and now they knew the truth. Meanwhile, Derek's work circles were abuzz with the rumors I'd spread, making sure that he was just as uncomfortable in his daily life as I'd been watching them together. As the days turned into weeks, I remained resolute, maintaining complete radio silence. Sarah sent endless streams of emails, desperate messages in which she begged me to come back, to reconsider. She even started leaving letters in my mailbox, filled with half-hearted justifications and empty words about how she had felt lost, how Derek had just been there, and it wasn't about love. The excuses ran the gamut, and each one night, about a month after the party, Sarah showed up at my door, looking like a shadow of the woman she'd once been. She was thin, disheveled, her eyes puffy from crying. For a moment, I felt a flicker of something, maybe pity, but it was quickly replaced by the reminder of what she'd done. "John, please," she whispered, voice breaking. "I just need to talk to you. Please, just 5 minutes." I kept my expression unreadable, standing firm in the doorway. "There's nothing left to say, Sarah. You made your choice, and now you're living with it." But we were everything to each other," she cried, her face twisting in desperation. "We have years together, memories, love. I made a mistake, but I'm still the woman you married. We can fix this." I shook my head, feeling nothing but disdain. "You're not the woman I married. That woman respected me, loved me, was loyal to me. Whoever you are now, I don't recognize you." Her face crumpled as she reached out to touch my arm, but I pulled back, stepping away from her. She looked devastated, her hand hovering in the air, a helpless, broken figure who barely resembled the confident woman who'd waltzed through our lives with Derek by her side. "I know you don't believe me, but I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "I don't know how I let it happen. I was lost, confused. I thought I needed something different, something new." I scoffed, shaking my head. "Different? New? You threw away our entire life for something that meant nothing. And now you're here, expecting sympathy? Sorry, Sarah, but I don't have any left for you." I saw a flash of anger flare in her eyes then, the wounded pride of someone who couldn't accept the finality of what she'd done. She straightened, wiping her tears, trying to regain some semblance of control. "Fine, John. If you're that determined to walk away, maybe I'll find someone who appreciates me, who sees my worth." The laugh that escaped me was cold, filled with the bitterness I'd kept bottled up. "Good luck with that," I said, my tone laced with mockery. "Maybe Derek will come running back." "Oh, wait, did he already leave you?" Her face fell, and I knew I'd struck a nerve. Word had gotten back to me that Derek, the man she'd thrown everything away for, had already moved on. Apparently, he'd grown tired of her as soon as their affair became public, leaving her to face the fallout alone. Sarah's expression twisted with shame, her eyes downcast. She nodded, confirming what I already knew. I don't know how to be alone." I stepped back, finally closing the door on her for good. "You should have thought of that before you betrayed me." The weeks that followed were blissfully quiet. I found myself enjoying the simple things again, going out with friends, spending time with family, and building a life free from the toxicity Sarah had brought into it. I even reconnected with old hobbies, things I'd put on hold during the whirlwind of our marriage. Life began to feel like mine again, a clean slate unmarred by lies and betrayal. One evening, as I sat alone with a glass of scotch, I thought about how things had unraveled, how I had lost what I thought was the perfect life only to find something more valuable: peace, clarity, and the chance to start fresh. There was something empowering about it, like I'd been freed from a prison I hadn't known I was in. In the end, Sarah's betrayal was the best thing that could have happened. It showed me who she truly was, who Derek was, and it gave me a second chance to rebuild, this time on a foundation of strength and independence. I raised my glass, toasting to the lessons learned and the life ahead. Months passed, and with each day, the memories of Sarah and Derek faded into the background of my life. What had once been an all-consuming betrayal was now a distant chapter, a hard lesson learned but one that no longer held power over me. I was healing, slowly but surely. Then, one evening, something unexpected happened. A small, unmarked envelope arrived in the mail. The handwriting was familiar. Sarah's? I almost tossed it, figuring it was another desperate attempt to contact me. But something made me stop, and after a moment, I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, covered in her messy scrawl. Her words were raw, a final apology laced with regret and a haunting sense of loss. She poured out everything she hadn't been able to say in person. She spoke of her regrets, of how she tried to fill some hollow space inside herself with cheap thrills and shallow promises. She admitted that losing everything, the life we'd built, the respect of her family, and even Derek, had left her with nothing but guilt and shame. But she didn't ask for forgiveness. Instead, she wrote, "I know I don't deserve anything from you, but I needed to say I'm sorry. I'm sorry for everything I destroyed, for the way I took you and our life for granted. Losing you is a pain I carry with me every day, and it's one I know I'll never get over. I hope you find someone who will love you in the way I should have, someone who deserves the man you are." I set the letter down, unmoved. The words rang hollow. Whatever remorse she felt was hers to bear, not mine. I had let her go, and there was nothing left to dredge up. I placed the letter in the shredder, watching it disappear. With that, the last remnants of her were finally erased from my life. The following weeks were a blur of small but meaningful moments. I started dating again, though cautiously. I had a few good dates, but I was taking my time, no longer rushing into anything. I wanted to build something genuine, a life free of deception and betrayal. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of hope, a quiet joy that grew with each new day. One evening, while I was out with friends at a local cafe, I ran into an old acquaintance from college. Her name was Rachel, and we'd had a few classes together years ago. She was warm, genuine, and unlike Sarah, she carried a sense of honesty that was refreshing. We laughed, reminisced, and found ourselves lost in easy conversation that lasted until closing time. We began seeing each other regularly after that night. There was no rush, no expectations, just a genuine connection, free from the ghosts of the past. I found myself opening up to her in ways I hadn't with anyone in years, sharing pieces of myself that I had kept hidden, afraid they'd be betrayed again. But Rachel wasn't like that. She listened, understood, and offered a kindness that felt like sunlight after a long, dark winter. As our relationship grew, I knew I'd finally found what I'd been missing. There was no drama, no suspicion, no gnawing doubts in the back of my mind. Just peace. One evening, as we sat on the porch, watching the sunset, she turned to me with a question. "Do you ever think about her?" I knew she meant Sarah, and I took a moment to consider my answer. "Sometimes," I admitted, feeling no pain in the memory, only a strange sense of gratitude. But not in the way I used to. What happened? It taught me a lot. It hurt, but it also helped me see what I really want and what I deserve. Rachel smiled, taking my hand. "You deserve all the good things, John." And for the first time, I truly believed her. As the months turned to years, I looked back on the wreckage of my past. Sarah and Derek had been lessons I needed to learn, painful truths I had to face to find my way back to myself. Life had tested me, broken me down, but I'd come out stronger, ready to build something real. In the end, betrayal hadn't destroyed me. It had freed me, giving me the chance to find a life that was honest, loving, and unburdened by lies. And in that freedom, I finally found peace. Oh my God, another really good one. I really hope you enjoyed this Reddit story video. I had a great time reading this. If you want more of this kind of content, just leave a comment, let me know. Follow my channel. I'm really trying to hit 1,000 subs before the end of the year. And we can do it. It's going to happen, guys. Thank you so much. Now, everybody have a great night and have a sweet dreams.